Welcome, this is Dissecting the Cut. Today's video is on Whiplash. We're going to dive into the film to explore what makes it a masterpiece of film editing. The number one reason is because of its use of collision editing. The first lesson to learn from Whiplash is how to use collision editing. But first, what is that? Collision is a term coined by the great Soviet theorist Sergei Eisenstein. He theorized that when an edit occurs, that the two images collide to create new meaning. A plus B equals C. He believed in the synergy that editing can create. Collision is a style of editing that focuses on the differences between shots. The collision might be between a close-up and a wide shot, or it could be between movement left to right with right to left. His idea was in conflict with his contemporary Vsevolod Pudovkin, who believed in linkage editing. Pudovkin believed the purpose of editing was to link images together to build something bigger. A plus B equals AB. He believed that shots were bricks built on each other. Linkage editing is all about making the edit invisible. This is the classic Hollywood style of editing. Eisenstein and Pudovkin were in conflict about their two ideas. In fact, Eisenstein mentions in his essay that they would often argue with each other late into the night. The thing is that both of them were right. In her book, Cutting Rhythms, Dr. Karen Perlman explains how these two styles of editing create a spectrum on which an edit can fall between. Both are legitimate ways to edit a film. Whiplash uses both collision and linkage editing throughout the film.
But I think what was really great about what Damien envisioned for the film was, he really had in mind a lot of different editorial styles. So he knew that the musical scenes and the rehearsing and the practicing would be fast and would be brutal. He wanted it to be ferocious. He said he wanted the musical scenes to feel like the boxing scenes from Raging Bull. He wanted the other scenes with other characters to have a different editing style. So the scenes with Andrew and his girlfriend, he wanted those to play the opposite. He wanted those to be gentle and romantic, and in that way they're very traditional.
Since collision editing is used for the final scene of the film, that is what I want to focus today's video on. The first thing to know is collision editing is not just fast-paced editing, although that often plays an important role. It is made possible through the directing of the shots. The shots that are cut together need to be in conflict. They need to be different from each other in specific ways. As you can see, there are many types of shots colliding in this final montage. There are many cuts from wide to close-up, from stationary to camera movement, and from low angle to high angle. More important than the shots colliding themselves is the fact that Andrew and Fletcher are colliding during this whole scene. This last scene works so well because of all the insert shots. They are everything, and Damien Chazelle knew that.
It was a very short shoot, 19 or 20 days. Something like that, but he did have a full day of inserts. And that, I thought, was very impressive for a movie of that size.
The insert shots are where a majority of the collision editing occurs. Let's slow down this cluster of collision edits to really see what's happening. As you can see here, these music chart shots are colliding by cutting from diagonal up to the right, then diagonal down to the right. Then the next set of shots are colliding by cutting from the left side of a musician to the right side of a musician. Then we cut to a trumpet shot, and then it cuts even closer. These are hard cuts that stand out and are flashy because they edit with the music so well. The cuts are far from being invisible, and that's alright. Collision editing is all about the edit being bold and stylish. It lets the edit come from backstage and take over center stage. Collision editing can only be sustained for so long though, so you need to be decisive when to use it and when to release it. Let's take a look at another example. These shots are colliding, but for different reasons. The first piano shot is colliding with the trumpet shot based on a dramatic change in camera angle. We go from overhead to low angle. Then the trumpet shot collides with the saxophone shot based on camera angle again. We go from low angle to high angle. Then we cut from the saxophone back to the piano. This time the collision isn't about camera angle, but shot size. We go from a wide shot to a close-up. The pattern continues again, but this time, when we cut from the piano to the trumpets, something has changed. We see the same trumpet shot as before, but it's been horizontally flipped. This adds a layer to the edit, making the collision different than the previous cut a few seconds before. This is very resourceful editing. It works so well because of the fast-paced cutting. The viewer doesn't have time to realize that it's the same shot as before. In her book, Cutting Rhythms, Dr. Perlman writes about how collision editing energizes the audience by forcing them to be more active viewers. Making this effort engages the audience more actively in putting together the images and surmising the ideas of the film. It is harder work to make these associations connect. It requires a more active viewer. By energizing the audience, collision energizes the film. Sequences or films that use collision as a style may therefore feel more energetic, vibrant, angular, or aggressive. So collision editing energizes the audience and the film. This is something you can feel while watching it, even though you may not know where it's coming from. This is why the last scene feels so active. The next lesson to learn from Whiplash is how to use rhythmic structure in editing. Rhythmic structure is assigning the film edit its own structure. This structure can be used for the entire film. It can even be broken down and used for specific scenes. Since the story is centered on Andrew, an aspiring jazz drummer, Whiplash brilliantly uses the rhythmic structure of a jazz drummer. A great example from a different film is Dunkirk. Dunkirk uses the rhythmic structure of the shepherd's tone, which is a music technique that creates the illusion of the music constantly rising. More on this in a later video. In the book Art of the Cut, Tom Cross says, "The drum playing in Whiplash, the sound of it, has an inherent rhythm that sets a metronome in the minds of the viewers. Its very existence in a scene invites a relationship with the image and sets up a sonic pattern that the picture can answer." Damien wanted to play off of that and employ fast editing, jarring smash cuts, and short insert shots coupled together to punctuate. He wanted the cutting to feel very swift and precise, almost as if the character of Fletcher was editing the film. Editing is often referred to as the rhythm section of the film. This is because editing sets the pace for the film. Tom Cross is essentially drumming, but with shots instead of drum hits. Each cut is like a hit of a drum or a crash of a cymbal. This adds an intangible quality to the edit that raises the quality of the film from masterful to masterpiece because the edit is in perfect harmony with the film. The best example to show this is the section of the caravan performance I used to start this video. As you can see, the edit is in perfect sync with the music. Every cut and every shot is a perfect visual representation of what the music sounds like. The drum shots are in sync with Andrew's drumming. In fact, the shots are exactly 9 frames each in this section. That's very precise editing, which mimics Andrew's precise drumming in this scene. A great example to compare to is the upswinging performance. Fletcher has sabotaged Andrew by not giving him the music chart. Andrew has no idea how to play the piece, and the edit follows his drumming by being drawn out and awkward. The edit isn't precise at all, just like Andrew, clumsily trying to drum to the music. The awkwardness comes through the various shots of the band members looking over to him, shocked at how badly he's playing. The shot at the end of the piece perfectly portrays the whole scene. Fletcher ends the piece on a hard downbeat, and then we cut to Andrew, who is still playing, not realizing it's over. Another example is during the first band practice scene. Andrew is playing for the first time, and he's not playing in time with Fletcher's tempo. His drumming is rushing.
Not quite my tempo.
The edit follows Andrew by also rushing. This can be seen by the jarring cuts of Fletcher waving for him to stop playing. After many failed attempts, Fletcher throws a chair at Andrew. The rest of the scene still has the sharpness and intensity of the jazz drummer rhythmic structure, even when it's not being cut to Andrew playing music. The sporadic editing is partly what makes Fletcher feel so intense. The edit isn't predictable like it is during a performance scene, and this makes the audience uneasy. It also mimics Fletcher's unpredictable rage. The brilliance of Whiplash is its action editing style that subverts what the genre typically calls for. Combining the music drama genre with an action thriller style is what makes the film so unique. This genre blend works perfectly to make this scene with Fletcher much more intense.
Damien always wanted to make an action movie first, an action thriller first, and a music movie second. So he knew that there was going to be some really fast-paced and fast-paced action and a lot of fast cutting.
The third lesson to learn from Whiplash is how to use micro-pacing to create dynamic edits. Pacing can be split up into two categories, micro and macro pacing. Micro pacing is the small-scale, shot-to-shot editing that happens in a film, while macro pacing is the big-scale pace and rhythm of a film as a whole. Micro pacing is focused on the flow of individual cuts. Macro pacing is focused on the flow of scenes, sequences, and even acts of a film. In his book, Art of the Cut, editor Steve Holfish explains how micro pacing can be compared to music. When you think about what it means to pace your edit or have rhythm, consider that this doesn't mean that you have the ability to make a cut on a beat. Consider that the audience needs some sense of both predictability and surprise. In music, pacing is often defined merely as tempo, yet tempo is merely the base time against which the rest of the music plays out. The tempo of a piece of music may stay completely consistent throughout, but the music can still be paced with sections of 8th or 16th notes, followed by the release of a whole note or rest. So let's think of micro-pacing musically. You can think of a shot being like a musical note. A longer shot length could be half or quarter notes, while quicker shots would be 8th or 16th notes. The important thing about pacing is that you need to change it up. How boring would it be to listen to music where they play every note as a quarter note or as half notes? And yet sometimes that is what we do as editors. Don't do the same pace for every cut. Throw in some 8th notes or 16th notes into that edit. Maybe after a really fast-paced section, slow it down to half or whole notes for a bit. Set up a rhythm that is predictable and then surprise the viewer by changing the pacing for a bit. Once this new pacing is predictable, try changing it up again and introducing another variation. Execution of micro-pacing differs with every project, but works best when it serves the film. Pacing isn't only about the length of shots or frequency of cutting, it is also about what happens inside of those shots. Here's an example. These two shots are about the same length, yet this first one has a quicker pace. Why is that? First, because of the camera movement. Second, because so much is changing in the shot. The second one is basically a static shot of Fletcher. Since nothing really changes in the shot, it has a much slower pacing compared to the first. The final lesson to learn from Whiplash is how editing can be used to creatively construct moments that weren't previously planned for the film. In the book Art of the Cut, Tom Cross talks about how the script for Whiplash was tight as a drum. It really felt like it was perfect, but once it was shot and you got in the editing room, surprise, surprise, you learn there's a lot of things that you don't need and that less is more. At the same time, you also find things that seem extremely clear in the script are actually confusing when you put the pieces together, so you have to re-engineer it in a certain way.
We found a lot of things had to change. So when we got to the end of Whiplash, I had tried to match the animatic as closely as possible, but it didn't really have any emotion. It was pretty dry and pretty mechanical. And so he and I worked very hard on that to try to figure out the places to put our characters. And that's what we really discovered was without the emotion of our characters, without the characters looking at each other, the scene really didn't have any value. It was just a mechanical exercise.
The last scene was initially missing moments of Andrew and Fletcher looking at each other. but Tom Cross was resourceful and repurposed material not initially intended to be used in the film to solve this issue.
It was about being open to finding value in all the footage you have, you know. It was, again, a reminder that every piece of film, every camera rack, every little moment that might at a glance seem messy, might actually have a place in your story. You know, every frame potentially has value.
Here are some examples of Tom Cross using creative constructive editing. This shot is actually reversed halfway through. It appears that Tom Cross wanted to show the disappointment from Fletcher, but then to have him glare back at Andrew. This reverse technique works well and turns the shot into a moment that didn't exist before. This is a small repurposing. We saw this shot a few cuts ago, but it looks like Tom Cross put a digital push-in on it to help it feel slightly different from the previous one. Digital push-ins can be very useful for emphasizing something in a shot. In this case, the emphasis is on Fletcher and his annoyance of Andrew taking control of his band at a live show. Digital push-ins can also help a shot with a longer duration to feel more dynamic. These axial cuts were done in post. It's a simple effect, but works perfectly to make this moment more intense. The axial cuts give the feeling of being from Fletcher's perspective. These cuts show the shock that Fletcher is feeling because of this counterattack from Andrew. Andrew suddenly jumps bigger and bigger in the frame. Each cut makes him look stronger and more intimidating. Axial cuts done in post are similar to digital push-ins, but instead of smoothly pushing in, it happens on a cut. They can be used in similar ways as digital push-ins, but the effect is more jarring and noticeable, so make sure that it's the right choice for your edit. Jump cuts can be a style of editing and can also be a tool in constructing moments. One way jump cuts can be useful is with speeding up a shot. Jump cuts can be jarring, just like axial cuts, but if you're careful, you can hide them very effectively, like in these examples. There's a jump cut here. There's probably only a few frames cut out. I bet they did this so the drumming in the shot would better fit the tempo of the music here. We can see the same technique here as well. There's two jump cuts here that are pretty much invisible. This is because the end of the shot and the beginning of the next are almost identical. Another way to speed up a shot is by speed ramping. Here's an example that uses a jump cut and speed ramping. Jump cuts can also be used to connect sections from different takes. If the jump cut is hidden well, these can appear to be invisible. If they didn't have as many whip pans as they wanted for this section, I assume that Tom Cross had to use whip pans from other takes to create the illusion that it's all one take. There are two cuts hidden inside whip pans. Here's one that's very creative. There's a jump cut right at the beginning of the whip pan to Andrew. Then there's another jump cut hidden at the beginning of the whip pan back to Fletcher. And then another jump cut hidden at the very end of that same whip pan. These cuts are hidden very well thanks to the quick motion of the whip pans. Jump cuts can also be hidden to stitch together practical shots with VFX shots, like in this example. There are actually 5 jump cuts hidden very well to create the illusion that this car crash is all one take. The first is hidden in the tilt back up to Andrew. The second jump cut is right when the truck hits the car. The third jump cut is hidden when Andrew's back covers the frame. The fourth jump cut is hard to see, but it's right here. It's still the VFX shot, but the focus is on the car rolling over. The fifth jump cut brings us to the practical shot with the stunt double in the car. The use of both visual and practical effects is what makes this moment feel real, and it's thanks to editing this is possible. That's movie magic right there. Tom Cross's editing transcends film editing, just like Andrew transcends drumming at the end of the film. That's why I agree that the Oscar goes to
Tom Cross, Whiplash.
This is the first Oscar and nomination for Tom Cross.